Hello, 5550. Just wanted to walk you through the Employment Outlook report. So let me just give you a little context, and then I'll kind of walk you through what I'm asking you to complete. So the Employment Outlook report is, if you're teaching TECM 2700, going to be one of the last group projects in the class, and it's worth probably the largest percentage grade for your students. So it's a big project. And essentially the crux of the project is that students are asked to research in groups their future career or profession. And so that could be something like computer engineering, cybersecurity, marine biology, any number of career paths that your students would be interested in. They're going to research that career path, and they're going to write a report that summarizes the employment outlook of that particular career. And this is actually like a primary / secondary research project for you and your students when you teach this. In that there are essentially three distinct data points or data sources that you'll use for this assignment and that your students will also use for this assignment. So the first data source is job postings. So you'll be placed in groups, and I'll show you your groups here in just a second. But you'll be placed in groups and you'll choose a career path. I'm assuming that y'all will choose a career path related to technical communication. But if you as a group would like to specialize, if you agree together as a group to say, let's look at user experience design or user experience research or technical editing or content management or content strategist, depending on what y'all are interested in, but you'll choose a career path, and it'll be related, I'm assuming, to technical communication. So the first sort of data source or data point will be each individual on the team will find 3 current job postings in your desired field. So let's say technical editing, you'll find 3 current job postings in technical editing, and that'll be your first data source. That'll tell us information that we need to know about the career path and the employment outlook. The second thing we'll look at, or the second data source, will be the Occupational Outlook Handbook. And there's a link to that in the assignment description. But let me quickly just walk through this. So the Occupational Outlook Handbook is a government website that will summarize a variety of career paths and the occupational outlook for each one. So for us, we would probably be looking in IT or communication. I can't remember exactly where technical communication is. I wonder if it's in here. Let's see. There's web developers. There's information security analysts. I know technical communicator is in here, so I want to show you really quickly. I think I'll probably just have to search it. Here we go. So technical communication. Let's see what we come up with. Technical writers. Perfect. So we have our occupational outlook summary for technical writers. We can see the things like the median pay, typical entry-level education, things like the number of jobs in 2001, and then ultimately the outlook. So 6% growth, so it's about average in terms of growth. And then there's a wide variety of different content related to that particular career path. So you can look at work environment, what technical writers do, how to become one, pay and job outlook, etc. So this is a super helpful resource. And then you can also click through these tabs as well for additional information. If you do choose to use this data, which I assume you will want to, I'm just going to ask you if you're going to use a chart like this, for example, to recreate the chart, right? So don't just take a screenshot of someone else's work, but kind of use some of the principles we talked about in visual design and recreate charts, present data in new different ways, and if you are presenting data, for example, like data in this table, make sure you're citing that data. So these are all things that you should make sure you're doing that. Make sure that you're doing, and also that your students will need to be reminded of. And then the last thing is each team member will interview one relevant professional. And by interview, this can be an email interview or a phone interview. But you're going to interview, so this is our third data source, is our professional. And you're going to interview a relevant professional. And what we want to use this interview for is we want to use this interview to ask questions that are not already answerable, meaning if we can find information about technical writers, for example, or let's see if they have UX in here, user experience, for example, if that information or that content is in the Occupational Outlook handbook or already in a job posting, then those are questions we probably don't want to ask our interview subjects. So, for example, and also just based on sort of societal norms, we probably don't want to ask things like, how much do you make? But we do want to ask things like, can you walk us through a typical day in your work life? Or can you talk to us about your path to technical communication? What was your undergraduate major? How did you find your way there? Or questions like, what kinds of courses or training outside of formal education did you pursue to sort of level up your skill set? So those kinds of questions are unique to individuals, that those kinds of questions can't be sort of answered via other sources. Those are the kinds of questions we want to be asking our interview subject. Okay, so 3 data sources: the Occupational Outlook handbook, the 3 job postings that you'll find, and then the 1 interview that you'll conduct. Okay, and so let me quickly show you your course groups. So there are 3 groups, and here they are. Group 1 is Karina, Taylor, and Jake. Group 2 is Tanika, Morgan, Liz, and Maureen. And group 3 is Heidi, Julia, and Jesse. And so just to clarify, each individual in the group will find their own 3 job postings. So, for example, for group 1, there'll be 9 total job postings. And each individual in the group will interview their own individual person. So in group 1, for example, there'll be 3 interviews. So the tricky part isn't necessarily researching on Occupational Outlook handbook or conducting the interviews or finding the job postings. That's all pretty easy, actually. And in fact, I would encourage you all to start that individually immediately this week, as early as possible, because that's the easy part. The difficult part is coordinating with your team to put together a report that summarizes all of your findings. So let's really quickly talk about that. So the actual report structure, so it's 3,000 to 3,500 words. And the actual report structure will mimic very closely a traditional IMRAD report. So introduction, method, results, discussion. You'll see here a list of following sections we're requiring. And you can see that these are also described in Chapter 21 of Lannan and Gurok. So if you need additional support or explanation for any of these, please see Chapter 21. So the front matter is going to be things like our table of contents, our title page, list of tables and figures, and an abstract. The main question folks usually ask is, should these all be on separate pages? And my answer is yes. I'll strongly encourage you to go ahead and put these on separate pages, and then also I'll strongly encourage you to use Microsoft Word's auto table of contents and auto list of tables and figure feature. So Word will generate these things for you. as long as you're using headings and things like that within your document. Okay. So that's the front matter. We've got our introduction, which consists of a purpose statement, which is basically whoever's reading this in our audience in this particular case is an academic advisor and undergraduate directors. So these would be technical communication academic advisors and undergraduate directors who we're writing our report to. So we would want to provide a clear purpose for that particular audience. We want a general overview of our field. This can be a really short sort of overview of the different maybe subfields within technical communication, some background, so some historical information about our field, and then a roadmap of the report structure. The roadmap is simply a sentence or two at the end of the introduction that says, in this report, what will follow is a report of our findings and a summary of recommendations, et cetera. So that's sort of more of a structural component, but that usually is at the end of the introduction. Altogether, this should be 1 to 2 pages. It's not going to be a huge amount of content, but just some context for our reader. The next section then is the data section. This is going to be the bulk or the meat of our report. And in the data section, we want to differentiate that from our conclusion section in that in our data section, we want to keep this mostly objective, right? Just a report of findings. So these are reports of findings from the Occupational Outlook Handbook, the job postings, and the interviews. Probably the best thing to do is to present in your report 3 distinct sections, one for Occupational Outlook Handbook, one for postings, and one for interviews. And what you're going to want to point out in your data section is so we want to keep it as objective as possible. So basically what we want to do is we just want to report what we found. We don't want to add a lot of sort of interpretation of what we found. We're going to sort of use the conclusion section for the interpretation. So for example, if you found sort of discrepancies between the Occupational Outlook Handbook, let's say the Occupational Outlook Handbook says, the average salary is $72,000 or something, and all of the job postings are significantly lower than that, we would use the conclusion section to discuss that, to interpret that, to comment on that. We would use the data section to simply report our data. So more objective in our data section, much more sort of interpretive or subjective in our conclusion section. So we're going to report our findings. This is in our report of findings, we're going to probably want to see a lot of graphs and charts, right? So when we're reporting data, we want to make it as easy for the reader as possible. And so one way we do that is to use visualizations where that makes sense. And then the final section is going to be a conclusion section, so summary of overall findings. So a finding is different than just a data point, right? So a data point would be something like technical communicators, or let's see, web developers' median pay is $78,000 a year. That's a data point. That's a fact. That's not a finding. A finding might be something like salaries for technical communicators vary widely because job postings indicate a lower salary while the Occupational Outlook Handbook indicates a higher salary, right? So the finding would be sort of the collection of data points with some sort of interpretation laid over the finding, or I'm sorry, the data point. So not to overly confuse this, but you're going to have probably 3 to 5 findings. Like, what are the main patterns? What are the main themes? What are the main takeaways from all of the data that you've reported in the prior section? What are those? And then in our summary of findings, you could even use visual design cues like bolding to just say finding 1, XYZ, finding 2, ABC, finding 3, etc. And those can be bolded so the reader can easily walk through the findings. And the last thing is going to be recommendations, right? So again, we're writing to academic advisors and undergraduate directors. So, what recommendations would you give based on all of our data and our findings? What recommendations would you make and provide for undergraduate advisors in technical communication? And then the last thing, of course, is references. And I don't care what format you use. I'm used to APA. That's what I was trained in. Usually, APA is pretty standard. You'll see a lot of IEEE too in engineering fields. So whatever citation method and reference method you want to use, that's fine. You can use Appendix A of Lannon and Gurok for assistance. I'm not going to walk through the entire rubric, but you can see the rubric is broken into the different sections of the report, and then also things like research integration, organization, style, and design. So take a look at the rubric just to familiarize yourself with the rubric, and also to familiarize yourself with what your students will be asked to complete as well. Okay, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to walk us through really quickly a couple examples of the Employment Outlook Report samples. So one is an example of engineering, but they look at multiple sort of sub-disciplines within engineering. And then the other is a group of mixed majors. So this is going to happen often if you teach 2700, where you have groups of students who are not all the exact same major, or who are not all looking to pursue the exact same career path. And that's totally fine. So this first one is, this first one's going to be the mechanical engineer, or I'm sorry, engineering, that looks at multiple types of engineering, including mechanical engineering, metal, and hardware. I just wanted to point out a couple things organizationally. So they're missing table of figures and table of list of figures and tables. And so that's one thing that's missing in the front matter. And they're also missing an abstract as well. So we've got our intro here. They've got everything you need in an intro. One thing that they do that I think is probably not the best thing to do is what they do well is they sort of describe the different courses and career paths sort of in general here at the top. And then they, where is it that they actually do the interview? Where is it? Oh, yes. Okay. So as they're sort of listing out different information about each career path, you can see that they're citing the Occupational Outlook Handbook here, and they're also using job postings here. Right, so many job postings support these ideas, as many qualifications include preference for master's degree or PhD. Right, so they're sort of at the same time reporting Occupational Outlook Handbook and their job posting results. So there's that, and they do the similar thing in salary statistics and job availability. So they're pulling mostly from Occupational Outlook Handbook here. And then they've got a completely separate section for their interviews. So each of them interviewed an individual, and they do a pretty decent job summarizing each individual interview and takeaways. And then they conclude with another purpose statement and some of their findings. I think this conclusion probably could be bolstered quite a bit more, and I think there should be a separate recommendation section. But other than that, this is a pretty solid report from an undergraduate group. I'm not going to walk too much through this second example, but this one has multiple authors, so this is a mixed group. And so this one is looking at a wide variety of career paths, including, including computer science, law enforcement, math, and high school teachers. So those are very different. And so in these cases, a lot of times it's like 4 individual reports that get synthesized into one thing. Um, one thing that I think this group did not do well is that their description of their interview subjects is just not. It's not. There's just not enough detail. So, for example, we interviewed this person and we found this. We interviewed this police officer and we found how important good judgment, analytical mind, and keen attention to detail is. Right. So one sentence summary of the interview is definitely not going to be sufficient. They would significantly be deducted on that section of research integration in the rubric. But you can see that's one area that they really sort of dropped the ball on, is their description of their interview subjects. They do a really nice job comparing all of the different career paths across common criteria. So that's a really sort of strong, smart strategy that this team used, right? So education, quality, skills, and certs, and important duties compared across all of the different career paths. I would have liked to see some kind of citation for this table. And then we can see similarly with salary and work environment, work schedule, and job outlook. They do the similar thing. And again, did they say this came from Outlook Handbook? I mean, it would be nice, again, if they were citing that information. And then they kind of walk through some charts. These are pulled straight from the Occupational Outlook Handbook, which I said not to do. So make sure that you're recreating your own charts. Or no, that's a lie. They created this themselves. I'm sorry. And then their summary. So they do a little bit better job in summarizing their findings and in providing a specific list of recommendations. So both of these reports have positives and negatives. Just wanted to quickly walk you through a couple examples. And the last thing I will point out is some of the other things we'll ask you to do. So analyzing a job posting, parts 1 and 2, and how to summarize an interview are all going to obviously be relevant for you as you work on this project. The last thing is the final version of this is going to be due July 23rd. So you've got almost 2 weeks to complete this. And so I would strongly encourage you to get together with your team early this week and begin planning for that. So that's all I have. Again, please do not hesitate to email with questions, and thank you so much.